We knew yesterday what the topic of Hillary Clinton's big speech today in Texas was going to be. We knew yesterday that she was going to be talking about voting rights today. We then had a further hint this morning of what the tone of those remarks would be when her campaign sent out a long, detailed dossier, complete with snappy graphic, hitting almost all of the Republican candidates for things they've done in office to curtail voting rights, particularly minority voting rights. But then in her speech today in Houston, Texas, I'm not sure anybody expected Hillary Clinton to let rip on the subject like she did today.
What's really going on in our country? Because what is happening is a sweeping effort to disempower and disenfranchise people of color, poor people, and young people from one end of our country to the other. North Carolina passed a bill that went after pretty much anything that makes voting more convenient or more accessible. Early voting, same-day registration, the ability of county election officials to even extend voting hours to accommodate long lines. Here in Texas, former Governor Rick Perry signed a law that a federal court said was actually written with the purpose of discriminating against minority voters. He applauded when the Voting Rights Act was gutted. In Wisconsin, Governor Scott Walker cut back early voting and signed legislation that would make it harder for college students to vote. In New Jersey, Governor Chris Christie vetoed legislation to extend early voting. And in Florida, when Jeb Bush was governor, state authorities conducted a deeply flawed purge of voters before the presidential election in 2000. Today, Republicans are systematically and deliberately trying to stop millions of American citizens from voting. What part of democracy are they afraid of? I believe every citizen has the right to vote, and I believe we should do everything we can to make it easier for every citizen to vote.
We knew today that Hillary Clinton was going to be talking about voting rights. We did not know that she was going to let rip against the Republicans she's running against for the presidency, but also Republican-led states across the country for the way they've gone after voting rights, particularly over the last few years. But then after ripping her Republican opponents and red states across the country for what they've done on voting rights, she then also made legitimately, totally unexpected, surprising news about not just what Republicans have done wrong in her eyes, but what she thinks ought to be done instead. Now, we'd heard yesterday that she was going to propose that every state in the country ought to have at least 20 days of early voting before Election Day, so we knew to listen for that. We did not know she was also going to propose this.
And I believe we should go even further to strengthen voting rights in America. So today I'm calling for universal, automatic voter registration. Every citizen in every state in the union every young man or young woman should be automatically registered to vote when they turn 18, unless they actively choose to opt out. If you're an eligible voter and want to be registered, you should be a registered voter, period. Now, Oregon is already leading the way, modernizing its system, and the rest of the country should follow.
Hillary Clinton speaking today at Texas Southern University in Houston. And you know what? The race to win the presidential nomination is going to be much more interesting on the Republican side than it is on the Democratic side this year. And it's just because of the two sides, right? It's Hillary Clinton and a handful of other people running for the Democratic nomination. Okay. On the Republican side, it's every well-known Republican in the country who is not currently under indictment, and even one who is, Rick Perry. I mean, it is inherently more interesting on the Republican side because nobody has any idea what's going to happen on the Republican side. And that will be amazing to watch and amazing to cover this year. It'll be an amazing display of just political kinetic activity on the Republican side. I get it. But one of the things we do get from the Democratic side in moments like this, which the Beltway would otherwise never get to in a million years, is taking policy ideas that are being innovated in the blue states. Remember them? Innovated in the blue states and thinking of them and talking about them and proposing them as models for the nation. When Tim Pawlenty was governor of Minnesota, he had a Democratic legislature in Minnesota, and the Democratic legislature passed a bill that would have automatically registered people to vote in Minnesota. You'd be automatically registered unless you opted out. Tim Pawlenty was a Republican governor, and so he vetoed it when the Democrats in the legislature sent him that. That was 2009. This year, it was blue state Oregon, which had a Democratic legislature and a Democratic governor who'd just been kicked upstairs, having been a Democratic Secretary of State who liked the idea of automatically registering everybody in the state to vote. And so Kate Brown, new governor of Oregon, enacted this first-in-the-nation law to register everybody to vote. You have to try not to be registered. She signed it in March. They think it's going to add 300,000 people to the rolls in Oregon, people who were eligible to vote but weren't signed up, 300,000 people in one fell swoop. And now, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is putting that forward as the model for the whole nation, the model that the whole nation should follow. And it's going to be amazing to hear all the Republican candidates try to explain why that's such a terrible idea that everybody would be registered to vote. But she's also just given a huge shot in the arm to people who want that Oregon model to be in place around the country. In particular, she's given a shot in the arm to the next state that wants to do it. Another blue state, but not just any blue state. It's the most populous state in the nation. Yeah, Oregon added 300,000 people to the rolls when they did this year. If California goes ahead and does it, if California does it, and they're trying to, they would add millions of people to the rolls if they can implement that same policy, which Oregon has already done, and which Hillary Clinton said today should be done nationwide. Joining us now is Alex Padilla. He's the Secretary of State of the great state of California. He's sponsoring that effort in California to try to move the state effectively toward automatic voter registration in California. Mr. Secretary, appreciate your time tonight. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for the invitation, Rachel. And great point. The exact number, by the way, is an estimated 6 million new Californians on the voter rolls if we can adopt that Oregon law here in California, which is frankly simply modernizing the current motor voter law that a lot of us are familiar with.
How hard would it be to do? I mean, the reason it's so important in California is not necessarily because of the partisan outcomes. I'm sure we could extrapolate some partisan outcomes from this, although they don't seem like the most important thing and they don't seem particularly clear. The reason California seems so important is that it's just so freaking many people. I mean, if adding 6 million people, how hard would it be for the state to do?
Not difficult at all. In fact, what we're talking about is modernizing the motor voter law that's been on the books for more than 20 years. When motor voter was first passed in Washington, D.C., let's remember what the fundamental premise was, that government has a role to play in facilitating people being registered to vote because that's good for our democracy. Well, in this day and age, knowing that we have the information being gathered at the DMV when people are applying for a driver's license or renewing a driver's license, let's share that information, much like our online voter registration tools that exist in many states currently does. And let's make voter registration an opt-out. We have a fundamental right, if you're eligible, to be registered to vote and cast a ballot. We don't have to go through the hoops to opt in to our right to free speech. We don't have to opt in to our right to not be discriminated against. We shouldn't have to opt in to be on the voter rolls. So by creating an opt-out versus an opt-in, we facilitate people's participation and they don't have to miss any deadlines to be able to vote in the next election.
What do you think the odds are? What do you think the likelihood is that you're going to be able to get this passed? What kind of a timeline, what kind of a task list do you have to get through in order to get this done in California?
So to implement the measure, it does require approval of the legislature and the governor. The good news is the bill working its way through the legislature has cleared its first house, our state assembly, and will now be considered by the state senate in the next couple of months, and hopefully on the desk of the governor come August or September. I feel confident, not just because it's good for our democracy, but frankly from an administration standpoint, and I want all the states in America to hear this, it's probably a more secure way of registering voters and a more efficient way of registering voters. And for government and others, imagine all the time, the energy, the resources that we invest in registering people to vote. We can now shift that into voter education and improving voter turnout.
Alex Padilla, Secretary of State of the great state of California. Fascinating and will be hugely consequential if this happens. Thanks for helping us understand what you're working on. Appreciate it, sir.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks. It is amazing how little attention in policy terms any of the blue states get, right? I mean, red states have been innovating in Republican policy over the last few years in this incredibly aggressive way that's absolutely shaped the contours of what it means to be a Republican politician. Everything in terms of the radical anti-abortion stuff, to the anti-voting rights stuff, to the anti-union rights stuff. All of that stuff has been playing out in the red states, and it's become the agenda of the Republican Party. They don't do it in Washington, they do it in the states. Same thing. The mirror image has quietly been happening in the blue states. They've been innovating too. Nobody talks about it as the agenda of the National Democratic Party. Hillary Clinton took a big step toward that changing today. It's kind of exciting stuff, particularly if you're a liberal. We'll be right back. Stay with us.